Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces coming from all over the globe. We have representatives from almost everywhere. We have from Canada, Macedonia, Honduras, Sri Lanka, um, Turkey, uh, Sweden, California, and myself, Brazil. Okay, so I thank you so much. This is another episode of our series that's hosted by CGS Minnesota, Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. And we, every month, we give the name of a documentary or a movie based on true events we published in our Facebook page and in our website. And we invite people to watch, and then we meet every third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Central Time, United States. It's open to the public, so everybody who wants to attend, just register and come. So tonight, we are talking and we're discussing about immigration in the United States. And we watched the documentary called Living Undocumented. It was a series of 6 episodes. And we invited Piumi Tamaratuga, who is an immigration attorney, and she's going to give you a little introduction about her, but it's a very informal group, and we wanted to keep open for people to ask questions and to talk. So with you, I give the floor to Piumi. Thank you, Piumi, for coming. Oh, and by the way, excuse me, I'm failing you all. I wanted to introduce you and tell you a little bit about Piumi. She's a JD from Sri Lanka. She has a JD from Hamline University here in Minneapolis, and she has a master's degree in law from the University of Cambridge. And now she's attorney, immigration attorney at Constantine Brooks Smith and Profit law firm. Now, yes, thank you, Piumi, so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Katya, for that very warm welcome. And thank you to my friend who just logged on, Tarangi, who introduced me to Katya. I'm delighted to be here. I'm hoping this will be more of a informal discussion rather than a formal kind of, address or remarks. But just to give you a little bit about my journey, which I think is so interwoven, my personal, my professional, and my insight into being an immigrant, albeit documented and therefore legal one, is so interwoven with this complex issue of undocumented immigrants that we are talking about. So as Katya briefly mentioned, I was born and raised in Asia, Sri Lankan by ethnicity and heritage, grew up in Sri Lanka, lived in relative privilege there, certainly part of the dominant majority culture, and then had the opportunity to read for my master's degree in law in Cambridge, which gave me insights, into kind of a European perspective, although Sri Lanka was colonized by Britain for 150 years. So that didn't, we were very familiar with the British perspective. But living in another country as a foreign student, clearly for a limited basis, gives you a different vantage point from being an immigrant in another country, which is where I ended up being For the last 25 years, I've been in Minnesota. In fact, this January, I completed 25 years having migrated here in January of 96. And for me, this has been an amazing journey of, seeing things when you are in your own comfort zone, where you are the majority community. There are things that you never really understand or fully realize, and doesn't resonate even until you are removed from that and put in another situation where you're not part of the dominant or majority culture, and then you start seeing things, and seeing the fragility of that sense of belonging, and who your people are, and where you feel safe in very different ways. And so I've worked and practiced law in Minnesota for almost 20 years at this point, and all 20 years have been in employment-based immigration. So our clients are the larger multinational corporations or universities that are seeking to hire and retain and promote top talent. And these are, individuals who are graduating from our top universities or are being attracted from overseas because of their very unique and sought after skills. That, as opposed to the other end of the immigration spectrum, which, for lack of a better term, we talk about the high end of immigration and the other end of it. The high end being those who are highly trained, highly educated, highly sought after. And then on the other hand, those who are doing those jobs that none of us, and especially American citizens, would never choose to engage in or operate in, even if they were unemployed. These are jobs, picking berries in the scorched sun, or processing meat in meat processing plants for 12 and 15-hour shifts, roofers, gardeners, the back-breaking jobs, or even nursing, allied healthcare aides, right? So, taking care of our elderly, changing diapers and dealing with all of that are truly essential, but we choose not to recognize because of the human face of those who practice in that area. And for me, that has been increasingly stark. And in the COVID era, even more so. But there was a recent study that came out that said 70% of those workers who were designated as emergency workers came from immigrant communities. I mean, look at that, 70%, right? So these are our garbage carriers, our nurses, our, all the allied health professions, so the lab techs, all of those, so the nursing home workers, those in the food industry, came from a segment of society that we have, as a society, chosen to not recognize as human beings. We are fine going to restaurants and enjoying the meals that are served by people who we feel comfortable with, but cooked and cleaned in kitchens by people who we don't want to have coming into the front of the house, right? I mean, and that is true for every space. Before COVID, our officers were in a fancy downtown, classy, commercial space. And every night, I mean, it was so stark for me day in and day out, when I go home late in the evening to see when the halls and the skyways and the elevator systems are less crowded, to see on literally armies of people who look as, from the Latin American community, from our southern neighbors, coming with cleaning gear So we will only want them even seen when we have vacated those spaces, right? But that is an essential service. And most of them became friends. You know, I've actually invited some over home to have dinner. And so their stories are just so compelling. And so for us to even stop and realize the humanity of those who make our economy run the way and our lives run the way that we want them to has been just this interesting kind of enigma and paradigm. And I didn't watch all of the series of living undocumented. It was really emotionally for me really hard to watch. I watched the very first one. I found myself literally sobbing and crying. You know, when you saw that one father who was being shackled, you know, seeing his child, you know, so as prisoners in shackles, they had more human empathy than some of those who you know were as the ones who were the oppressor there. So it was just fascinating. I think I'm rambling. I think I would love to get kind of more engagement and just an opportunity to engage more in a conversation than the lecture form. Any thoughts, reactions? And we can go wherever, because I have the immigration based. I've never practiced in the refugee or asylum or in the undocumented arena. I know enough to be dangerous, but I certainly have access and visibility, and of course empathy for that. Having said that, not to spin this in the, you know, the on the bright side, in 25 years of being in this country, I have never ever felt a sense of belonging. I have a place here, this is my country, than I did the day I saw this administration being sworn in, and ever since. Not that intangible, you know, manifest ways anything has changed in either in the immigration space or in any of the areas of work, but that sense of, you know, possibility and belonging has never existed for me.
And we do have a lot of immigrants here.
I'd love to, you know, kind of let's make this interactive.
Yes, and we will in a second. So we just heard from Piumi, an immigrant lawyer here in Minneapolis, and I would like to welcome you, uh, Megan Galicia. For those who actually watched the Living Undocumented, uh, you saw in 4 episodes uh, her few clients, and you saw, especially in the first one that caused most of us to be shocked and sob. We saw her client Louise being detained by the ICE, and so I wanted to introduce you to Megan, who she's I just wanted to give a little introduction about her. So she has bachelor degrees in mathematics, philosophy, and Spanish. She has a JD for the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She joined Martinez Immigration Law in 2017, focusing her practice on family and humanitarian petitions and removal deportation defense. Megan is a former teacher who lived and taught in Texas and Mexico before returning to her hometown of Kansas City to fulfill her dream of becoming immigration lawyer. That until she was shoved by an ICE officer in a public television. With
Yeah,
that, I'd like to welcome Megan. Thank you so much for attending here, Megan.
thank you, Katya. Hi, everybody. It's an honor to join you in your meeting. Thanks for for watching the documentary, for discussing it, for your interest in immigrants and immigrant rights. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I got the message from Katya, and I thought, I would just pop in and say hi to everybody and answer any questions that you had. Zoom makes it very easy for us to do things like this. So, I can't be in Minneapolis, but I can join a Zoom meeting. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, so just to give you guys, I could give you a little bit of background on how we got involved in this documentary. So I work at Martinez Immigration Law. The owner of the firm is Andrea Martinez, and we've worked together for quite a while. And she was my mentor in law school. And then I joined the firm after law school. And basically in 2017, I got an email that went out on a listserv for immigration lawyers who represent people who are detained. That was an email from a woman who was pleading for help for her cousin, who had been detained in a place called Platte City, Missouri, in this little county jail. So in Missouri and Kansas, ICE actually has contracts with the county jail, so that there isn't a dedicated detention center in Missouri or Kansas. They contract with the county jails. And so this email is, asking for help, and it goes out to this nationwide listserv. And I saw it, and it talked about how she had been detained during a traffic stop. She was about 7 months pregnant, and could anybody help? So, as you can imagine, like emails like this come through quite a bit. And so I initially didn't do anything, and then I had friends send it directly to me, who knew that I was in the area of Platte City. It's about 15 minutes from our firm. And we had just had a memorial service for another client of mine who took his own life in a detention center in Georgia. And so I had really fresh in my mind this verse from the Bible that talks about, how you visited me in prison. And so I just remember thinking about that over these about 2 days that I had this email in the back of my mind. And so I went to Andrea, the owner of the firm, and I said, I think that we should see if this woman needs our help. There's nobody else that's responding. It's been, 2 days or so. And I feel really compelled to reach out and see how she's doing. And so Andrea and I just went up there that Friday and in 2017, and we met her, or 2018, and heard about her case, heard from her that she was afraid to return to Honduras, had an ex-partner who was a police officer who had been abusive, and that she had missed a court date in Texas. And so what happens in immigration court, unfortunately, is that if you don't understand the system, don't understand the language, or just make an honest mistake and you miss a court date, you will most likely receive a removal order. And so that's what happened to Kenya. And we decided to take her case. And then we started to talk to her family. We got to know Luis more, who's in the documentary, and I think becomes kind of the heart of course, we're biased because we represent them and we're very close to their family now, but I think Luis and the lengths that he goes to do everything he can to protect Kenya and Noah, who's not even his biological son, I think, really become a big part of the documentary. So that's how we got involved. We ended up, we didn't represent Luis when we took him to ICE, because, what ended up happening is Kenya was, we tried everything. We even reached out. Cory Booker visited her. in the Platte County Jail, here in Missouri. And we tried everything we could. We exhausted all of our appeal options and everything was denied. So ICE, called us and said, bring the child up to the office so they can be deported together. And that's when we called Luis and said, you got to come back. You have to bring the son back from Texas so they can go back to Honduras together and not be separated. And that's how this whole thing went down in that first episode, where it just clearly escalated. And and Andrea was pushed to the ground. We were both pushed. Andrea fell to the ground and broke her foot and had some other injuries. So yeah, that's the story, the background. What I was starting to say was that we didn't represent Luis when we took him up there, but we had we'd advised him that he was going to the ICE office at great peril, at great risk to himself. And this guy, I mean, really, there was nothing stopping him. Maybe it's being, 22 or 23 years old. Maybe it's love. I think it's all of those things, but he was just undeterred and he wanted to go up there and be able to say goodbye. And then he was arrested as well. So, and then after that, of course, Kenny and Noah were deported back to Honduras. So. Yeah, so if you guys watched it, if you have any questions or anything, you didn't watch it and you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, I have one. Is Andrea better?
Yes, she is. She's much better. She still has pain in her foot, and she.
Fica que sí ligno, nesse aqui.
Oh, it
Sorry.
sounds like somebody's mic might be.
Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, she's doing much better. We both went to therapy after that. She's still in therapy, and she has a lawsuit against ICE and the officers who assaulted.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yes.
I was watching very late in the night. It was almost midnight, and when that happened, and I actually doubted of what my eyes were seeing. I had to rewind and see again because I thought that I had falling asleep for a second, or I couldn't believe. So I think my next question to you is, I know that you two you couldn't believe what was happening, but do you have any idea? Did you have an opportunity to talk to anybody? Do they talk? Do you have in your head, in talking to Andrea, in case you can say that, you have an idea why that happened? I was talking to my husband and we felt the guy was very nervous, which is very unprofessional because he probably does that every day, all the time. So he shouldn't be so defensive because there is a camera. He should know better. But I wanted to hear,
Yeah.
what did you think?
I think he was surprised and he was nervous and I think he was angry. I think he lost his temper. And I remember time kind of slowing down and watching and thinking, okay, this is where he escalates. This is where things are going to get out of control, because I could see that switch go off when somebody really loses their temper. And I think that he was angry. He maybe felt blindsided by having media there. And he just has that kind of disposition where he gets angry pretty easily. No one had ever had an interaction with him like that.
Mm-hmm.
No one in the local bar. Everyone was very, very surprised. We're still surprised when we watch that video or talk about it. We still can't really believe it, but I think that was part of it. Honestly, though, we were also pretty surprised by the by the turnout, the cameras, and the activists there, we knew that, a call had been put out locally because I talked to some of the activists. We didn't want the deportation of a pregnant woman and her 3-year-old child to go unnoticed, and they scheduled it for 3:30 in the morning. But when we got there, we were blown away by how many people were there and by the news media. So, yeah, I think he just lost control.
Yeah. Have any questions? I think I saw Jack raising his hand first. After is going to be Jim. Jack.
Thank you, Katia. Hi, Megan. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm just curious about the recruitment process for ICE employees. I mean, obviously, there's a certain type of person that gets selected, but I'm wondering if there's also some compassionate people, even though they might be in a minority, and if they actually help the people who are in distress by supporting them in some way.
Yeah, so surprisingly there are. We've also been surprised by that, but we have a good working relationship with a couple of ICE officers at the local Kansas City field office who are very cooperative. I have had ICE officers, I've had one officer approach me in a grocery store to ask me to help someone who had kind of fallen under the radar and had been detained for over a year and couldn't get a lawyer, afford to hire a lawyer. So yeah, there are some good ones who I think joined more to with like ideas about law enforcement and arresting people who had committed serious crimes or were serious threats. I don't know a lot about the recruitment process, but they, ICE officers tend to be pretty gung-ho, and they were really emboldened by the Trump administration. So,
Thank you.
and then James, you've been waiting a while with your question.
No, I'm okay. First of all, I've done a little bit of background for the issue of undocumented, and according to some recent statistics, 73% of the undocumented speak Spanish, and 68% come from either Mexico or Central America. So I'm trying to lead up to a question here. We hear a lot of, sometimes very sad and heart-wrenching stories of people who have left Honduras or Guatemala or somewhere and have come north. They've come north to the United States. They come all the way to Minnesota when it's 20 degrees below zero, and they don't speak English. And so my question kind of keeps going back to very fundamental. Shouldn't we be trying to address this problem at the source? If social conditions, poverty, whatever, are so terrible in Honduras, shouldn't we try to address them in their own familiar culture and say, oh no, come to Minnesota and where everybody speaks English, and by the way, you don't have a driver's license, and, this undocumented, you don't have any that. I've often thought of it, it's somewhat of a euphemism, undocumented, because you just fundamentally don't fit in, because we have systems, just like I'm waiting to get a shot, I'm waiting to get a vaccine shot, and because I'm a citizen and I fit a certain category, they're going to give me a shot when my turn comes. Okay. Undocumented says, okay, just all the rules are out the door. Just show up, and somehow the system in Minnesota will take care of you. So again, I would very much like to go back to the source of the problems. And if the source of this problem, I've heard many stories from Honduras. Why don't we put all of our energy and our efforts to alleviate the bad conditions of Honduras or countries that people immigrate from?
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, we've created systems in the United States to exclude people, undocumented people. It used to be that there weren't really onerous requirements to get a driver's license. Now, whether it makes more sense to have, whether it's a deterrent or somehow makes more sense to have people driving around without a driver's license or insurance because they don't have the right paperwork, that just seems like the obvious answer is no to me. But we've definitely created systems in the United States to exclude people, whether it be for political reasons that that certain politicians disagree with migration, or because politicians think that it's going to serve as a deterrent. And you're right about the programs that address the root problems, the root causes of issues related to migration. Unfortunately, under the Trump administration, a lot of the programs in Central America specifically were ended because they couldn't see the logic or the purpose in addressing these issues at their root source and potentially preventing some of the problems that cause people to migrate in the first place. So the thing about immigration that I think is particularly challenging is it swings so wildly from administration to administration, decade to decade. It's something that has been and is at the whim of whatever Congress we happen to have or whatever elected officials we have. So sometimes we've been more concerned about the root issues. Sometimes we haven't. Sometimes we have caused, the very problems that people are fleeing in these countries. We haven't had the greatest track record, in Latin America, certainly. So I agree with you. I think that the Biden administration has said that they want to focus more on, preventing these problems at the source.
Right. And I'm not going to belabor this, but again, sometimes when I talk to, I won't put you in a category, people like you, when I talk to people that deal with immigration issues with a big heart, with a great deal of empathy, but you just talking about the driver's license, you say it's a paperwork problem. But it's really, the whole idea of citizenship, systems, the fact that people are legal. I have a driver's license, and I had to take a driver's test initially. I had to take a vision test. I had to prove that I had insurance so I would be financially responsible. All of these things are what we do in a kind of a law-based society. And so again, I certainly don't agree with much of the previous administration, and I hope Biden is a breath of fresh air. But again, that's what I would put the majority of my efforts on, would be to dealing with things at the source, because otherwise it becomes very chaotic. And again,
Well, my clients would happily take a driver's test and a vision test and would probably stand on their heads for driver's licenses. So when I say it's a documentation issue, I just mean that they don't have the work card or the right piece of paper to show the driver's license office that they have legal status. But they would be happy to do that, and they would probably pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars,
Oh, yeah.
to do that. So
Again, we take, sometimes these terms are kind of thrown around. In our family, everybody all the males have served in the military. So again, that's a dimension of citizenship. So it isn't like we showed up from wherever we came from and said, okay, I'm ready to become a citizen because, hey, the economy is better here than it was in Sweden.
well, my family certainly did. So, but we could go on like this for a long time. I want to see if anybody else has any
That's
questions.
fine. I wanted to throw this out and then you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have another question. Piumi wanted to have a word. Piumi.
First, I wanted to say thank you, Megan, for the work you do. We need more people like you. And so hats off to you. As someone who practices on the other end of immigration, we have nothing but admiration and respect for those
Thank you so much.
like you. So thank you. Having said that, I did want to jump in on James and Megan. I agree with both of you. Getting to the root cause is prevention is always better than cure. And it was really heartening and refreshing. I was right after the swearing in that same week, Senator Gutierrez, the New Jersey senator, I'm blanking out on his name, Gutierrez, right? Who was talking about his, and he was going to be the chief sponsor of the immigration reform bill, talking about a significant focus on addressing these root causes. What exactly is, prompting this mass migration into the northern border, and that, to Megan's point, has been systematic and historical foreign policy, right? So we can actually stem some of the flow. You will never completely stop immigration. So James, when your ancestors came from Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, there was something that prompted them to come here. And I'm sure your ancestors came legally, but not all European ancestors came here legally. One has to take only one short trip to Ellis Island to look at the documented, and well-established pattern of those coming from European countries, all of whom didn't have all of the documentation or the ability to show the financial means that they were not going to be a public charge. So there were, when we talk about a country made of law and law-abiding citizens, we have to also ask ourselves, who did those laws, cater to and serve? The same law wasn't applied uniformly across the spectrum. I remember years ago going to Ellis Island with my kids, and just it was so stark, the similarity of what we as immigration attorneys are facing and trying to deal with and address today is no different to the trials and travails and challenges of immigrants who came from European countries, yes, of a different skin color, but they were escaping either famine, persecution, religious or political, coming for economic opportunity, or family reunification. Today too, why are these people, clamoring to come to the US? It is famine, economic opportunity, family reunification, or fleeing some form of persecution. Back then, we know of documented stories of Europeans who didn't have the $15 to show that they were not going to be a public charge. One person would have the $15, go through the immigration inspection and pass that same $15 to the person behind him or her. So that one $15 got served by many, right? But now if an immigrant or an undocumented person who doesn't have even the ability to, ask for any kind of immigration benefit tries that, you'd be slapped with fraud and misrepresentation on top of everything else. So it's just fascinating how it's the laws and the requirements haven't changed, nor has the reasons that these individuals are fleeing, but how we apply the law is so discretionary based on your skin color. I mean, we've got to address that and not pretend that the same law is being used and applied uniformly.
It's true.
We have, James, to your point, we have undocumented individuals who are knowingly recruited by recruiters of our armed services under the promise of being given the opportunity to qualify for permanent residence and then citizenship, who once they get into armed conflict and return, who are told, no, you can't. Right? So we have a system that serves the GI Bill, the benefits lifted vast populations from the lower economic classes to the middle class in this country. But Black soldiers who fought in the same war, faced the same adversities and risks, came home and didn't have any of those, right? So yes, you bring up a really good point. And I hope the time finally has come in our country to look ourselves in the mirror and ask, is this how we want to continue for the next 200 plus years too?
Yeah. We have a line of people wanting to ask questions or make comments. So next one is Diane, and Diane works with undocumented people here in Minneapolis. So Diane.
Okay, I volunteer for an organization. It's called, I got to write it. It's called ICOM, and it's called Interfaith Coalition on Immigration. And my particular volunteer post was going to the ICE office on Tuesday morning, and then I would go into court and be a witness to a trial. And all of the trials were represented by an attorney, because if you don't have an attorney, you're just out of luck. And I'm sure Megan will understand how important her position is. Most of the people there have been stopped for a traffic violation. And as they pay their fine in the court that they've gone to pay restitution, they are reported by the law enforcement. And ICE is there to pick them up. They don't even get to say goodbye to their family. ICE takes them to jail. The Anoka County Jail houses many, many of them, but there's 5 other jails in Minnesota that house them as well. Then the other piece of what we do as volunteers is, and help attorneys, is in the community. Many of these people have been here for 10 years. They have a job, they're in churches, they're in communities. If this is a first offense for a DUI, they probably can be left here. But if it's a second offense, it's unlikely that they won't be deported. So we get letters from people in the community. And the other piece of work that we do is families are very hurt by this when their loved one is in jail for maybe 10 months, maybe longer. They have no income because they were the sole support. So we do fundraisers and help with the family. Some of them have kids that were born here. And yes, some of them get deported. I haven't been doing as much because of COVID, and I'm older and I didn't want to expose myself, but it goes on all the time. So, and I noticed that someone posted something about Honduras. And not only has Honduras, had the coup by the United States as other countries have. But now they've got a great drought going on. And corporations from Canada and the US are fighting for the water. And actually, the activists in Honduras asked the United States to stop sending money because it was going directly to the corrupt politicians and nothing to the people. Anyway, that's all I have to say. It's called ICOM, and if anybody is interested in doing any volunteer work for them, there are other things that they do. This is just one that fit my lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. That's amazing work that you are doing. I will post the name here in the box for you guys. The next question was the same question by Sandra and Alexandra. Alex, do you want to ask the question on behalf of both of you?
Yes, Katya, I would like to ask, would everyone expect any improvements with the new administration regarding the immigration reform or not? Because they are suggesting like 8-year citizenship path, and do you see any improvement regarding human rights, regarding the rights of people who are immigrants in the US? And that will be the question.
For some, speaking for myself as someone who's practiced in this field for 20 years, I have never been more hopeful. I think for the first time since the Reagan era, we have the possibility of bringing about comprehensive immigration reform with bipartisan support. 60% of those who voted for President Trump agreed that we need comprehensive immigration reform and that deporting 11 million people who have called this their home and served the country was not an option. So that's very telling. More than 80% of those voting Democratic agree that immigration reform should be high on the agenda. So if there was ever a chance for bipartisan support and getting some form of comprehensive rather than piecemeal immigration reform, I think it's in these 2 years. Megan, I'm curious as to your.
Yes, well, I'm glad to hear how optimistic you are. Well, the legislation introduced today is it's a dream in a lot of ways. It's amazing when you read through it and read through the summaries of it, you know, because there are all kinds of, you know, practitioners who specialize in different ways and so in different areas. So just kind of following their threads on Twitter, on other social media today has been fun because they can really analyze it and animate it and bring it to life. In terms of what I've read, I think it would be fantastic. I am not that optimistic though, that it would pass, and maybe that's just my disposition. I also haven't been doing this as long as Pijumi has. She's definitely had more experience in this area than I have, but I'm hopeful. But at the same time, I do recognize that it's going to be a hard sell politically for a lot of Congress people. And I don't know that doing it as part of the budget reconciliation, if that would be, you know, if there would even be enough Democrats to be on the side of something like this. So I hope that there are. I think it's humane, it's smart. I don't think it goes far enough with detention. We're still detaining families. We're still detaining children, that should never be okay. I don't know that it goes far enough for people who have criminal history, minor criminal history that under immigration law can, you know, basically mark you for life. But on the whole, I think it's a fantastic piece of legislation.
Thank you, Megan and Piyumi. Next in line is Taranji.
Sorry, Katya. Yes. Hi, thank you so much, Megan, Piumi, for your insights. I just wanted to comment. So I work at an organization called Alight that works with refugees, in many countries in the world. And I just wanted to, as we were having this conversation, there are almost 258 million, 260 million migrations that take place every year. And it just reminds me about the reality of this is the human condition. For millennia, for hundreds of years, human beings do migrate. And I feel that sometimes we tend to box, like our particular experience and kind of put it into a neat little box and act like just because we are now, because our ancestors took that trip, and then we are this privileged, way, that we tend to feel like judge others by that. But, so I have traveled to different places. I've been to Turkey. We did this human-centered design work, talking to many, many refugee families. And it was very clear to me that the reason people travel is often even with conflict. They don't, the decision to travel, leave the way of life that you know, is not a light decision ever. It is because like a school is bombed. It's because hope has been eliminated for children or something like that has happened, or they don't want their kids to be raped, or, something like that, that moves them to do this. So I think there is a problem in this convenient dialogue of this economic migrants, which is very hurtful, because if the people who first came into the United States were called economic migrants, they were never called economic migrants, they were called pioneers, they were called adventurers. So I think we have to be very mindful as citizens how we use words to demonize or to kind of, show like a negative picture of people who are actually going through some of the same human conditions that many people in the world will always do. And we can never stop migration because that's not the human condition. And you can, so I feel that sometimes we tend to artificially make our lives simpler. But I think we have to wake up in this time that simplicity is very harmful for many populations that are vulnerable. So, I mean, there are 70 million refugees in the world. It's not only about empathy, I have to say, it's about our own humanity that we really have to be careful about. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yes, and if I could just jump in and say, most of my clients and the people I've worked with, they don't want to be here. They did not want to leave. Even people who just come to work. The border in the past, before it became much more highly militarized, was more porous, and people would go back. People would come here and work, and then they'd go back to their families. And I think everybody that I know who has come here, they left quite a bit behind. They left their culture, their language, everything, and they didn't do it, just on a whim. So they would, I think, prefer, if they have to, out of necessity, come here to work, they would prefer to be able to go back home. If they're from a country that's contiguous like Mexico, or that's close to the United States. And I think you're right. I think it's also human nature to try to want to exclude people and protect what we consider to be ours. I think that's as much a part of human nature as the necessity to migrate. I've seen it, I've traveled, and I've seen it in other countries. I've seen it, my husband's family is from Mexico. And I've heard them, we've had conversations where they say, well, we don't really want, certain people here. We don't want those people here. So I think it is part of our nature, and we have to stop and say, well, wait a second, who is it that I'm excluding? Why are they coming? Would I do the same thing? Of course I would do the same thing. I would take my children to safety. I wouldn't wait in line, a line that doesn't exist for a visa that will never come when something's going to happen to my family. So of course I would do it in a heartbeat. And I think that's what a lot of people are facing.
So true. Next in line is Ivania, and for those who don't know or were not here when I introduced her, she's from Honduras, and she's she works for the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, and she's on a leave right now and studying in the University of Minnesota Law School, but she'll be back very soon. So, Ivania.
Thank you, Katya, and thank you to Pijumi and also to Megan. Really, I'm really moved by the work you're doing in here in favor of immigrants, not only from Honduras, but from different places, and also by all the voluntary work that so many of you are also doing. And especially like your interest and what's going on over there, and what are really those driving factors that are causing so many people to take the tough decision to leave their country, to leave their families. I think, and this is like my personal assessment and my feeling is that us as Hondurans have failed our brothers and sisters. I think nobody would ever have to take the decision to leave their country. And like, I'm extremely a privileged person that has had the opportunity to go to a university, to have a scholarship, to come here, to do a master's degrees. So I'm like extremely the small percent of people that can actually have that opportunity, and that is not representative of most of what Hondurans are going through. And I had like one comment in the root causes, because I know this is a very important issue. And I do want to connect it with what some of you already mentioned about the role sometimes the cooperation, and especially the US cooperation, can have in a country. And we're talking of countries, especially in the northern part of Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, that are very dependent on US aid. And unfortunately, in the last decade, a significant amount of that US aid has been focused to strengthen the security forces, to strengthen the military from a viewpoint that you need to strengthen them to be able to combat drug trafficking and all criminal organizations that are flowing through the Central American ism. However, that approach at the end has impacted in the zero or very weak accountability mechanisms to the roles of security forces, of military forces, who participated with great impunity in human rights violations in context of massive social protests against massive corruption cases. So I think this is one key point, and I think that a very important factor that the citizenry have here in the United States is that you are very accountable of your elected officials. So I think it's very important the role you have in just voicing civil society in here to make accountable your US officials of what type of aid is being provided to the country, what is the focus of this aid, and what impact this aid has. Because as we mentioned, unfortunately, significant amount of that aid has been focused on the military and the security sector that are not, let's say, contributing to better the access to health, education to most of the population. And also, another aspect that I think it's really important is also the role and the accountability that certain politicians may have in Honduras. I think it's well known in, well, most places, the level of infiltration of organized crime in the political party. So this topic, I think, is a key issue so that you can make sure that the funds that get to the country are actually destined to contribute or to improve the situation of most of Hondurans. So there has to be a certain level of accountability of where that cooperation is going, which actors are receiving that cooperation, how are they being held accountable for all of that cooperation that can be flowing there. And just to put it as an example, like the brother of the current president has faced a trial here in a New York court 2 years ago for being involved in drug trafficking to the United States. And in part of that investigation, the own files that are public to everybody have highlighted the level of corruption and the level of criminal association that the brother of the president has had with notable politicians in the country. So I think this is a key issue, and in the matter or in the way in which this level of corruption and this level of impunity is not addressed, well, people are not going to trust in their institutions to provide for their rights and to provide for their safety and for their security. And just then, well, another question I would have really fast to Megan is, you mentioned a bit about what you assess that will be some of the impacts of the legislation that is being discussed right now, and also Kajimi mentioned it. However, I would like to know or to have your feedback on this executive order that was admitted, I think, a couple of weeks ago, in which it seems that the priorities are not right now in people, for example, like Luis or other cases that we've seen through that documentary. Do you actually think this is going to be effective in the short term as a temporal measure until more structural changes, including legislation, come abroad? And what is like your assessment, for example, of, I think there's already a lawsuit against it in Texas, and how some states are reacting to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ivania. So the one of the first things that the Biden administration did was to change some of the enforcement priorities. So law enforcement has discretion in deciding who they arrest and who they detain, and that includes ICE. So under the Trump administration, everybody became a priority for removal, for arrest, detention, and deportation. And now we're seeing the Biden administration go back to a more measured approach that was used under the Obama administration. Under the Obama administration, they had enforcement priorities that focus on people who they considered to be national security threats, who had very serious criminal history, et cetera. So they're moving back in that direction. It is interesting because I do think it's a great movement in the right direction. They actually released another set of enforcement guidelines today, and there are some issues with them that I think will actually end up impacting a larger number of people. There are some terms I think that immigration lawyers have pointed out can be vague and could actually enable ICE to scoop up a larger group of people with criminal history. That's kind of going maybe too much into the weeds, but all of that to say that I think we are going in a better direction in terms of policy and focusing resources on people who are considered to be, you know, highest priority for removal. Now, we haven't seen a big change on the ground, to be honest with you, at least locally. I expect there to be quite a bit of resistance to this, and we're still seeing people getting picked up for traffic tickets and for minor things like that. In terms of what's going on with the moratorium on deportations, so there was supposed to be a 100-day moratorium on deportations, and that was enjoined or stopped by a conservative federal district court in Texas. And as far as I know, that injunction continues. So that is still, you know, suspended. I was looking at a stat, and I haven't fact checked it myself, but I was looking at a stat from another immigration lawyer saying that in just, you know, the time that Biden has been in office, there have been about 26,000 deportations. And there have been some pretty high, 26,000, yeah. There have been some pretty high profile deportations of Haitians, and Haiti is particularly volatile right now. So it's changing, but it doesn't feel fast enough. So.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Ivania. Next in line is Mary, although I know she's having a problem with her audio. Mary, are you Mary Pearl? I think she's figuring out yet. So next is Bharat.
Oh, yeah. Well, if I may, I just want to move this conversation to some old stories. One story that comes to mind, and these are true stories, of a grandfather sitting at a park in London, enjoying when a very upright British person walking with an umbrella comes over and points the umbrella at the man. Incidentally, the man came from India through Africa, and so he points to the man and says, why are you here? Why don't you go to your country? So the man says, well, I'm here because I'm your creditor. You came to my country and stole all kinds of diamonds and all my wealth, and I'll come here to collect it. So you see, I'm here because you were there. So our world is really all one. And this whole notion of nationalist boundaries and so on doesn't make much sense. And that takes me back to another story. And that goes back to old kind of wisdom books that were there a long time ago. And in that, I'll just read that. It says, there is no happiness for him. And please remember, this was written hundreds of years ago. So if it were written today, we wouldn't say him. We would just say him or her or whatever, okay? So anyway, there is no happiness for him who does not travel. Thus, we have heard, living in the society of men, the best man becomes a sinner. Therefore, wander. The feet of the wanderer are like the flower. His soul is growing and reaping the fruit, and all his sins are destroyed by his fatigues in wandering. Therefore, wander. The fortune fortune of he who is sitting, sit. It rises when he rises. It sleeps when he sleeps. It moves when he moves. Therefore, wander. Anyway, so it seems to me, you know, like an immigrant is really a very brave person. It's not something like a helpless or someone, it's like an amazing person. In fact, one of those immigrants was a man who came from Europe with a sort of a bag in his back, and he walked in, had fuzzy hair and all, and he became an American citizen. His name was Albert Einstein. Okay, so like we in America have been so blessed by having had immigrants. If you look at the list of Nobel Prize winners that are won in Nobel Prize in American, US Nobel Prize winners, I bet you will find at least 60 to 70% came from outside of US. And of course, you know, like Silicon Valley is a very good example, which is our shining technology temples. Well, 60% of the CEOs of Silicon Valleys came from India. And so it's a kind of, and China too is also. So as such, you know, we are one world and we should really welcome all that come. And I really was touched by what Terengi said about the way we should be. And this is just my thoughts about it. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Varad. Mary McKeon is back. Can you hear now?
Yes, I can. I can.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, I lived in Arizona for Phoenix area for almost 40 years. And the Latino population, back in the day when Sheriff Joe Arpaio was running rampant, he would have his deputies. There was a certain intersection up north. He would have his deputies parked, and they would be waiting for all of the landscapers and for all of the housekeepers to exit the gated communities. And he would stop them. You'd see them on the side of the road, against the car, on the ground. I spoke with some of them, and they said when they left their homes in the morning, they would make sure that they didn't have a bulb out on their truck. They would make sure there were no twigs available to fly out the back end, because they didn't want to have any reason to be stopped. But they would make up things and stop them anyway. This basically the 6 o'clock news would almost be like bragging rights on they'd stopped all of these people. These people were just trying to make a living to feed their family. It was really a terrible time. He was a villain. And a lot of that. And I personally did know somebody that she came over, and she and her little girl were separated. And she described it as they crawled across a river bed. She was separated from her little girl in El Paso. And the little girl was molested. And it took some time for her to reconnect with her child. And I, to this day, I still, I know her, and she's still in the United States, and most of her family are there. But such sad things happen. And if there's only a process could be put in place to become, legal. They're here to make they left something horrible behind. And so that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Mary. Sandra also asked to speak. Sandra.
Hey, so yeah, there's so much to connect to. So first of all, thank you for hosting this conversation. It should be ongoing and it should be central to what's happening. I just wanted to put a plug in for artists and creative thinkers to be in the mix in these conversations. I'll just say several years ago, I was at a community-based art center here in Minneapolis running it. And shortly after 9/11 happened, and when Homeland Security had another new twist to it, a deeper dagger, I curated a 4-year series that was called Immigrant Status. And it looked at what is the current status of immigrants in this country? How are they looked at? And then also the idea that immigrants come with their own status and we don't need to assign it to anybody. Along the way, a lot of really brilliant artists contributed and asked some really wonderful questions that I think might help be bridges to folks. And so I was in many groups asking these same questions. So there was an exhibit called Talking Suitcases. And Susan Armington and Carla Vogel were the 2 artists that conceived the project. And it was really a story in a suitcase. And the questions, the essential questions that were asked were, if you had to leave your home at a moment's notice, you didn't know if you were going to return, you didn't know where you were going, and you had this small satchel, you had a small bag, what would you take with you and what would you be leaving behind, as someone said earlier? And of course, when you have an immigrant or a refugee, the first thing is going to say, first thing will be their papers. You're nothing if you don't have these legal papers to get you across borders, hopefully. Many non-immigrants, those far removed from that topic, would say things like my credit cards, obviously my phone, my computer, my laptop, my dog. They were moving their whole house with them. But it for as crazy as that was, it really got people talking about what people are fleeing and what's of value aside from the children that they're carrying on their backs. So I just wanted to say that artists and arts can play a significant role in getting people to think more critically and to talk origin story, which is kind of getting us away from what otherwise is a policing society. And if we look back to the roots of policing, the militarization of policing and what it's meant to do is to protect wealth by whom and bring back that property, right? So anyway, so many things to talk about, but I also want to say the role of the arts have been many also arts projects. There's a project called Animating Democracy through Americans for the Arts, where theater groups worked across the border in Tijuana, looking at what border issues there were and used theater as that navigating tool and conversational conduit to get people conversing. So anyway, thank you. Rich conversation.
Thank you, Sandra. And we are getting to the end of our session, and I wanted to give the opportunity to Megan and Piumi to give us their last thoughts for now. We hope that we're doing, but if you'd like to give our last thoughts and perhaps I would suggest if you could say what now? What do you expect now? And if you could say one thing for each one of us, and we have journalists, we have a lot of human rights advocates here, including myself, human rights attorneys, we have a film director, and we have more immigrants in this video than we have locals. So if you both, Piumi and Megan, could say or suggest one thing that we could do to try help address and improve the immigration situation in the US, what would that be? Piumi, you first.
First, thank you everyone for this opportunity and honor and to listen and get to know you. You're absolutely right. The conversation is one to have on an ongoing basis. Thank you too to Megan for all you do. I cannot overemphasize the importance and profoundness of what you do. And then Sandra, you make a very good point. You know, sometimes through art, we are able to communicate with people that otherwise we are so polarized. You know, immigration is such a hot button issue that we just don't seem to be able to talk to each other when we are labeled and slaughtered in as being on opposite camps. So you make a very, very good point about the need and the power of art and artists. I'll put a plug also for MIA, Minneapolis Institute of Art, had a beautiful migration exhibit not too long ago, which I hope at least some of you were able to see. But again, it is thought-provoking. And Tarangia, for me, really captured, you know, the most profound thought that migrating and the freedom to move is a basic fundamental thing. We were all born initially out of the, you know, that first African man and woman, and then we've migrated through centuries and thousands of years to habitate the entire world. So that is never going to be stemmed, but it is truly human, you know, devastation that makes us travel around. One thing that I think each one of us can do is make our voices heard, especially to our elected officials. Despite all that we say about a broken democratic and political system, our elected officials do count and listen to numbers. And I'm sure Megan has done this on many a trip to the Capitol on Lobby Day. When we speak about the need for immigration reform, they will say, yes, we know the naysayers are the minority, but they are the largest voices. A silent majority does nothing for any cause. You know, if you believe in something, speak up, even if it is to simply leave a voicemail to your elected officials. I mean, that is I think for me, the most impactful thing that we can do as individuals. And again, thank you for your voices.
Yes, well, there are so many ways that people can help. I think that Sandra brought up a really good point about the arts, and it's unfortunately not something that I think about. I need to think about that more. But I think it can really touch people's hearts. I think that each one of you probably have something that moves you or interests you. And there are so many ways that each one of you, different ways that each one of you can help people, and specifically immigrants. I think we really need your help, as Piyumi said, leaning on our elected officials to pass immigration reform, to enact policies. There are all kinds of possibilities with policies that can be enacted at the agency level. It doesn't have to be a law even. And, so make sure that your Congress people know your positions on immigration and know that you're looking to them to do the right thing and to welcome immigrants into our communities. The other thing you guys have, Minneapolis is like almost, I would say one of the best places in the US to meet immigrants, to interact with people from different cultures. And there are tons of wonderful volunteer organizations in Minneapolis that serve immigrants and refugees. And, from a simple act of kindness of letting someone know that they're welcome here. I hear stories from my clients all the time when they'll say, well, yeah, I was an American, but she was really nice to me. She helped me do something, or, this person helped me figure something out. We put a call out for a pro bono client we have who is having trouble with groceries, getting, enough food for her family. And we got all these gift cards in, for grocery stores. So there are so many things that you can do from the one-on-one level to the larger political spectrum. And I think that you can incorporate your interests and your strengths in whatever it is that you choose to do. Thank you so much for inviting me and letting me crash your meeting from Kansas City. And if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to email me. My email is my first name, MEGAN, @martinezimmigration.com. I can put that in the chat. But yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. We love hearing from people and working with people and helping people who want to help immigrants too.
Thank you so very much, Megan. Thank you so very much, Piumi, for coming here, for talking to us and giving us everything, all information that you have. I wanted to give you guys a little information. Every time that somebody spoke about a certain organization, I put the link in this chat. So you can, and while I'm talking, you can still go on and save them. Also, I wanted to say, for those who are not familiar, we have this program every month, every third Thursday of every month. And every month we talk about a different matter, a different topic of global interest. So this month was about immigration. We watch a movie or a documentary and we discuss about that. Today, Megan and Piumi, the two amazing immigration lawyers, agreed to speak with us, and we are very grateful for that. Next month, on March 18, we will have another session, and we are going to watch on our own time. We are going to watch the documentary called On Her Shoulders, and we wanted to celebrate the Women's Day the entire month. So this is going to be one of the programs. And we invite everybody. It's public, it's open to anybody who wants to attend. You'll be receiving a notice from me, but feel free to reach out to get the link if you don't. Otherwise, I would love to see you again soon, next month. I want to thank you, everybody, everyone. It makes a lot of difference because, it is very important to realize that we are a nation of immigrants. This session is filled with immigrants, and we are doing good things. So we needed to think. Needed to be more thoughtful of what is happening in the country and try to improve the relations and try to cooperate and make sure that we can live together in peace, because it is possible. Thank you so very much for being here, and I hope to hear from everybody very soon. Thank you, guys.
Right.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you much.
Gracias.
Important work. Keep it up.
Thank you.